In economics, from the actor's subjective position, and in regard to the future, we could also say from a prospective viewpoint, because prospective means concerning what is yet to be made, we can affirm that a law of tendency exists, according to which the longer the time period involved in an action, that is, the greater the number and complexity of its stages, the more valuable that action's results or the end the actor is attempting to achieve. I repeat, as the time period understood in subjective terms, that is, the number and complexity of stages involved in an action increases, other things being equal, the value we assign to the end we accomplish increases as well, and this value we assign to the end, which we tend to value more the longer the time period involved in the action materializes in quantitative or qualitative terms. That is, in a greater number of units of the final good we wish to attain, or in goods of higher quality, or in a combination of both. Now, I will demonstrate in terms of economic theory that this law of tendency always holds true. So, what separates the actor from the end he so desires, which is what he intends to achieve and what he values? Well, simply a set of successive stages that take time. If what separates us from our much-valued ends is a period of time, then clearly we human beings will attempt to achieve our ends as soon as possible. Our ideal would be to achieve the ends we so desire, like finishing our degrees in 5 years, tomorrow, if that were possible. We seek to accomplish our ends as soon as possible, precisely because as soon as possible means the sooner the better. If I aim to achieve an end as soon as possible, because what separates me from my end is a set of stages which I must gradually complete, and which make up the time period involved in the action, then I will be willing to postpone the achievement of my end only if I believe that by lengthening the time period, I will achieve an end of greater value. If I do not think that postponing my end will lead to my attaining an end of greater value, I will always choose a shorter action. So it is clear that from a prospective viewpoint, human beings often decide to undertake actions which take more time, and they postpone the achievement of their much-desired ends, but only because they believe that by doing so, they will achieve more valuable ends. You all could have decided not to get a bachelor's degree, but instead to start working immediately, or enter a shorter program, maybe get a vocational degree in just a year or two. Why did you not do that? Why did you embark on an action which requires 4 or 5 years before the end is achieved? Precisely because you subjectively value much more highly the end you are working toward than the end you could achieve with a shorter action, going to work immediately and not getting a degree, or entering a degree program of a shorter duration. So, I have demonstrated the law of tendency. We all act in such a way that if we postpone the accomplishment of ends, that is, if we embark on actions that will mature in a more distant future, it is only because we believe that by doing so, we will achieve ends of greater value. And, almost without realizing it, we have introduced the essential category in capital theory, namely the law of time preference. The law of time preference is a fundamental law of economic science, and it states the following: other things being equal, which economists express using the Latin phrase ceteris paribus, keeping all other things the same, other things being equal, the actor prefers to satisfy her needs or achieve her ends as soon as possible. To put it another way, between two goals to which the actor assigns the identical subjective value, and which are exactly alike in every aspect but one, their different availability in time, one being available before the other, the actor will always prefer the goal that will be available sooner. The law of time preference in economics can also be formulated very briefly as follows. Other things being equal, human beings prefer present goods to future goods. And this very brief formulation of the law is simply another way to express or articulate the essential idea I was presenting before. That is, an action is comprised of a set of stages which take time, and which we must complete before achieving our much-desired end. And, therefore, since what separates us from the end we desire is a time period, we wish to achieve our end as soon as possible. We could also express this idea as follows. We are willing to postpone the achievement of an end into a more distant future only if, by doing so, we intend to accomplish an end of greater value. And the illustration is quite clear. You have decided to pursue a degree which takes 5 years to obtain, instead of going to work tomorrow or choosing a shorter degree program. Therefore, we are talking about a law which is an ontological requirement of the logical structure of human action, of the way human beings were created. We cannot conceive of our essentially creative, entrepreneurial nature in any way which does not rest on time preference. We are not talking about a psychological law or a physiological law. We are talking about a category embedded in the logical structure of every action, and therefore of every man and woman, every member of the human race. We all base our actions on the law of time preference. Let us consider what we understand by capital good and what we understand by capital. Though they may appear to be the same thing, they actually are not. They are radically different in nature. Well, we will use the term capital good to refer to each of the higher-order economic goods Carl Menger writes about. In other words, each of the intermediate stages which the actor subjectively views as such, and through which he believes he must pass before achieving his much-desired end. So, from an economic standpoint, it is not the physical essence of a resource which gives it the nature of a capital good, but rather the fact that an actor believes it will help him accomplish or complete one of the stages in his action process. Therefore, each of these intermediate stages we must pass through materializes in the form of a capital good. As an example, let us imagine a specific production process or action. We are hungry, and we are going to creatively satisfy our need with a fried egg. But before we arrive at a golden, perfectly prepared fried egg on our plate, with a pinch of salt on top and ready to be eaten, yum, which would be the final stage, a first-order economic good, we must entrepreneurially pass through a series of prior stages, higher-order economic goods, which we must complete before we can accomplish the end we so desire.
Por las que tenemos que culminar antes de alcanzar ese tan ansiado fin. Y entonces podemos concebir los bienes económicos de...
Now we come to second-order economic goods, which make up the stage immediately prior to final consumption.
Y es el huevo.
We have the cracked egg we are about to drop into the boiling oil, and we can go further back, and our frying pan is still at the store, and the oil is being bottled.
Pero podemos ir hacia atrás.
But we can go further back, to the company which molds the frying pan out of a sheet of steel. And with respect to the oil, the olives must be pressed, and the oil stored at an oil mill. But we can go further back, to the blast furnace, where the sheet of steel is made. And we can go even further back, to recently extracted iron ore at the entrance of a mine. And we can go further back. Well, each of those intermediate stages takes the form of a capital good. The iron ore at the mine entrance is a capital good. The block of steel that comes out of the blast furnace is a capital good. The machine used to mold the frying pan is a capital good. The frying pan in the store window before we buy it is a capital good. And the frying pan in our kitchen just before we fill it with oil is a capital good. Each one of the prior stages we must pass through in an action or production process before we arrive at the final consumer good materializes in the form of a capital good. And take note, it is not the inherent physical composition of a good which makes it a capital good, but the fact that someone subjectively believes it will help her achieve an end. Thus, a wrench is a capital good, but not per se. It is only so if I think, this will help me tighten a nut, fix my car, or accomplish some other end. Then I insert the good into the structure of an action process, into one of the successive stages, and at that moment it becomes a capital good. The necessary condition for the production of capital goods is saving, understood as the giving up of immediate consumption. This is very important, and we will be studying it. Saving is defined in economic terms as the giving up of immediate consumption. Whenever I could consume something today, that is, achieve today an end that is of value to me, but I decide to not achieve that end today, but instead to postpone the satisfaction of that end into the future, I am saving. When you decided to not start working right away to earn some money, but instead to postpone for 4 years going to work, so you could finish your degree, you were saving. Saving means giving up immediate consumption. And by the term consumer good, we understand first-order good, which is a good that directly satisfies human needs. In other words, the end one seeks to achieve. When I postpone the achievement of an end into a more distant future, I am saving. To illustrate the fact that every capital good requires prior saving, let us consider the classic example which the great capital theorist and teacher of von Mises, Eugen von Boehm-Bawerk, develops in his classic work Kapital und Kapitalzins, Capital and Interest. Boehm-Bawerk gives the example of Robinson Crusoe on his island. Daniel Defoe was a very intelligent man. He was not only a novelist, but also an economist. So he knew very well what he was writing about. When Robinson Crusoe is shipwrecked, and little by little he regains consciousness, we can all visualize the scene. He wakes up lying on the beach, shivering with cold, his face washed by the waves, and immediately he sits up and thinks, "Am I dreaming? No, I have survived." He is practically naked because his clothes are all torn, etc. And he stands up, stunned, and begins to explore the island. He realizes he has a chance of surviving. His most urgent need is to drink, and he sees a puddle of water, as it has rained during the night, and with that he quenches his raging thirst. In the example Boehm-Bawerk offers, Crusoe discovers some bushes covered with mouth-watering berries, and he realizes that fruit will relieve his hunger, and he can survive on it. Of course, when Robinson Crusoe has been living on a diet of berries and water for a number of days, he becomes aware, as a human being endowed with an innate capacity for creativity and entrepreneurship, that he is living in a wretched state. He devotes the whole day, from sunrise to sunset, to the effort of searching for berries and picking them by hand. He has no time left for anything else. And in that way, with great difficulty, he manages to alleviate his hunger and survive. Well, the entrepreneurial light bulb goes on for him, and he has a realization. Take note, this is the creative act of an entrepreneur, a human being. He thinks, if I had a wooden stick, 2 meters long, I could reach much higher into these bushes, strike them, and gather 10 or 20 times as many berries. So I could gather the berries I need to live on in 1/10 of the time. The rest of the time would be free, and I could devote it to... And the entrepreneurial light bulb goes on for him. How could I spend that time? I could build a hut or a shelter.
Incluso veo que hay
because I am living at the mercy of the elements. In fact, I see there are wild animals here. Maybe I could make a bow and some arrows, hunt them, eat meat, and make clothes out of their skin. Notice, these ends are of much greater value to him. But unfortunately, he cannot achieve them, because he is devoting all of his time to barely surviving by gathering the corresponding berries by hand. So, Robinson Crusoe asks himself, how long would it take me to prepare a wooden stick? And he thinks, which is the entrepreneurial act, that the wooden stick would take him 5 days to prepare. So he begins to conceive the different stages involved in the action period. He must select the tree he believes has the most suitable branch. He must climb onto the branch, and using his own weight, remove it. He must take off other, smaller branches, small leaves, etc. He must shape the branch with his hands, a stone and some shells, until it is finally ready. He estimates he will need 5 days. Notice,
le separa de
5 days separate him from a future he values much more highly, the chance to devote much less time to getting nourishment and so be able to build his shelter. Those 5 days materialize in the form of a series of intermediate stages he must pass through before his wooden stick is ready. So, the problem is that if he must spend 5 days preparing the wooden stick, what will he eat during those 5 days? And here we must all pay close attention to Böhm-Bawerk's example to fully comprehend the role saving plays. Because at that point, Robinson Crusoe says, "It certainly does not look like anyone is going to rescue me from this island. I had better thrive and improve. So, even if it takes an effort, even if it is a great sacrifice, even if it requires painful discipline, I have no choice but to save." We have just defined saving as any giving up of immediate consumption. The decision Robinson Crusoe makes is obvious. He decides that for a lengthy period of time, he will not consume all the berries he gathers by hand, and instead he will save a portion of them each day in a little basket, though he experiences some hunger. In other words, he decides to save. He decides to tighten his belt until he has accumulated in his little basket enough berries to survive on, without having to make the effort to pick any by hand for 5 days, which is the time period he imagines he will need to prepare his wooden stick. Well, the materialization of each of those intermediate stages is a capital good. As Crusoe saves, he gradually produces his initial capital good, which will culminate in the basket full of berries. Then, once he has enough, and he stops picking berries by hand, and for 5 days devotes himself to finding the branch and preparing the wooden stick, one capital good, the berries accumulated in the little basket, will gradually turn into another different capital good, the wooden stick. And if Crusoe has entrepreneurial success, if he has been right about the project, if he has not made a mistake regarding the time period or the choice of tree, etc., then after 5 days he will have his wooden stick. What has he eaten during those 5 days? He has relied on prior saving, which consisted of making a sacrifice and not eating everything he picked each day. So, what is the difference between the poor Robinson Crusoe, who picks his berries by hand, and the rich Robinson Crusoe, who has a wooden stick? What is the difference? Well, precisely the 5 days of prior saving, which have taken the form of the wooden stick. They have been transformed into that capital good, that tool. Once the process of producing the wooden stick has concluded, the situation is radically different. By striking the bushes, Crusoe can go much further. He can gather 10 times as many berries as before. Just 1 hour's labor is enough to feed him, and he can spend the rest of his time building his shelter. Notice how much Robinson Crusoe's standard of living has risen because he has sacrificed immediate consumption. He has saved, and he has produced a capital good. Any improvement in our living standard requires a prior sacrifice. It requires us to refrain from consuming the maximum possible amount in the short term. The difference between the poor Robinson Crusoe and the rich one is that the rich one has 5 days accumulated in the form of a wooden stick, a capital good. He is rich because this tool permits him to achieve much more. The poor Robinson Crusoe, who did not wish to make a sacrifice and did not wish to save, goes on picking berries by hand. Imagine there had been 2 Robinson Crusoes on the island, and one of them had chosen not to make a sacrifice. Me? Go hungry? No way! But the other had been willing. After a period of time, we would have seen that one was richer than the other. Maybe the first one would have been envious. Hey, why do you have a hut? And why do you have goods? And why do you eat meat while I am poor? It is the old story of the ant and the grasshopper. Listen, I have made the sacrifice of saving and producing a capital good which has permitted me to achieve much more valuable ends. Meanwhile, you are in a fix because you have not been willing to make that prior sacrifice. The stick, which is the capital good, is simply an intermediate stage in a production process. This stage is more distant in time. Specifically, in Böhm-Bawerk's example, it is 5 days further away, with respect to the immediate berry production process of picking them by hand. Now we come to the following essential idea. Every process of saving and investment in capital goods requires adequate intertemporal coordination. I am speaking from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And as future entrepreneurs, your success will depend on this. You must be able to suitably coordinate your actions in the present with your actions in the future. What do I mean by this? Well, to give you a clear idea, it would be tragic if Robinson Crusoe made a mistake in the preparation of his capital good, and in an excess of optimism, he sought to produce a capital good disproportionate to his saving. Imagine he decided on an act of sheer folly. Imagine that with his 5 days' worth of saved berries, he decided, I am going to produce a blast furnace. Well, intuitively, we would all respond, this guy is nuts. Robinson Crusoe has lost his mind. But let us say he makes this error of judgment. There is a complete lack of proportion between the very modest saving within his reach, 5 days' worth of berries, and the grandiose project he wishes to carry out. I am thinking big, a blast furnace. And, of course, what happens? Well, once he has saved enough berries to live on for 5 days, he starts to build his blast furnace. He says, okay, I need to lay the foundations. So he begins to lay the foundations. And 5 days later, he realizes he has made only a hole. His hands are bloody, and he has eaten all the berries he saved. A monumental entrepreneurial error. He has squandered his savings on an overly ambitious capital good. At the end of the 5 days, he is just as poor as before. Even more so, because he is tired and his hands are bloody. Or imagine, this is less serious, that when the time comes to make the wooden stick, it takes him only 2 days. This is less critical, because what has happened here is that he has made an unnecessary sacrifice. He could have saved for just 2 days. This is less serious. He has not wasted his savings. He still has 3 days' worth of berries, and they could enable him to produce another capital good, or to start building his shelter. What I am trying to say is that we must suitably coordinate our present actions with our future actions, and avoid the errors of maladjustment and discoordination. I want you to very clearly understand the example of the total disproportion between modest saving and an overly ambitious capital good. I say this because, mutatis mutandis, this is the process the economy has gone through in recent years. On an aggregate level of society as a whole, to give you a taste of what we will be discussing, entrepreneurs have rushed to invest as if society's savings were much greater than it actually has been. In other words, we have committed the same error Robinson Crusoe committed when he wished to make a blast furnace based on 5 days' worth of saved berries. Why have entrepreneurs rushed to invest as if saving were much greater than it actually has been? What has deceived them and prompted them to undertake such madness? We are now discovering that many of the capital goods built cannot be completed or do not have a buyer. We can find the explanation in our last class, when we covered the process of credit expansion. Money created from nothing in the form of loans and given to entrepreneurs. But we will stop here. Now you can begin to intuit the theory of the cycle, which we will discuss in detail in this course. The very simple example of Robinson Crusoe on his island sheds light on the functioning of a modern economy. In modern economies, like the one in which we move and play a part, there are many economic agents, households, companies, that perform different roles. We will use the term capitalist to refer to that economic agent whose role is precisely to save. In other words, to consume less than he creates or produces. So, in economic terms, let us forget the pejorative sense attached to the word capitalist. A capitalist is any person who saves. He postpones immediate consumption and thus consumes less now than he could consume. That is, less than he creates or produces. So, when capitalists give up immediate consumption, they make available to other economic agents, called workers, goods that can sustain them for the duration of the production process, which will mature in a more distant future. Just as Robinson Crusoe acts as a capitalist when he saves berries that later ensure his survival while he prepares the stick, in a modern economy there are many groups of human beings, capitalists, who save, and thus they do not consume all they could, and they free up resources, consumer goods, which sustain the workers involved in producing capital goods, which will mature only in a more distant future. The two situations are essentially identical. The vast majority of workers are involved in producing wooden sticks, so to speak. Some workers manufacture cars, others build computers. They are not engaged in producing food, nor clothing, nor entertainment, nor films. The vast majority. And yet, they are consuming these things. Why are workers who are producing capital goods able to consume? Precisely because an entire army of capitalists save and make available to workers the consumer goods they need to survive while the production process lasts. Keep in mind that the process of production in a modern economy is extraordinarily complex and lasts a very long time. The production of a car, a motor vehicle, comprises hundreds, even thousands of successive stages, and these require a very prolonged period of time. It takes many years to manufacture a car. Starting from the moment the company begins to design the vehicle, which is the stage furthest removed from final consumption, or the highest order capital good, to use Karl Menger's terminology. The process then passes through many other stages, which consist of ordering the necessary materials from suppliers. Not only sheets of steel, which in turn require iron ore at the entrance of a mine, a blast furnace, etc., but also the leather, the painting components, and the electrical components. It is, so to speak, a remarkably complete process of stages, and it has many branches. Iron ore in the mine requires a certain period of time. I'm obliged to use a spatial analogy, which, as you know, is not applicable in economics, but it is the most visual. The iron ore is then placed in a blast furnace and becomes sheet steel. Then the sheet steel is transported to an assembly line, where machines shape it into a car body. Of course, in addition, someone has had to design these machines which shape car bodies, and the machines have gone through different stages before reaching this one. This is like a branch. Likewise, all of this reaches the assembly line, for instance, at the Ford factory in Almusafes, Valencia. It arrives, and there are the robots assembling the different plates. However, someone has also had to make the robots, design them, manufacture them in Japan, etc. This is another huge branch, which has also gone through numerous stages before reaching this one. And then comes assembly, and then painting, and then tests, and then distribution. We have all seen trucks and trains loaded with cars. They reach the different dealerships, and then comes the advertising stage, followed by a period of time, and then the final consumer good and the proud owner of the new vehicle. A student once made a very amusing remark. He said, "Listen, Professor, what do you mean it takes many years to make a car? You are wrong." I am? How so? Well, I visited the General Motors factory in Zaragoza. Oh, you did? I watched the assembly line. Oh, really? Well, listen, a car came off the line, and then another, and another, and another. Each car took 2 minutes to produce. Each of those cars had taken years to produce. And within that very complex structure, which is a modern economy, the different economic agents, companies, workers, are located in different places within this tangle of branches or stages. The stages closest to the final stage of consumption are usually called consumer goods industries. For example, the Corte Inglés. The Corte Inglés, selling items in its department stores, is very close to final consumption. The stages furthest from consumption are called capital goods industries. The vast majority of entrepreneurial effort and human labor occurs in the stages distant from consumption. Only a tiny fraction of the effort of entrepreneurs and workers is made in the stage closest to consumption, particularly in a developed economy. There are companies devoted to designing automobiles today. Do you know which automobiles they are designing? The ones we will buy 7, 10, 15 years from now. Those are the cars they are designing. Hybrid cars, electric cars. A tremendous amount of effort and entrepreneurial ingenuity is going into them. Also, certain pharmaceutical companies are involved in research and development and are experimenting with new medications which will not mature for another 5 or 10 years. Other companies are perhaps working with blast furnaces, and the people involved do not know if a certain sheet of metal will ultimately be used, for instance, in a ship or a car that will mature in 4 years. Other companies transport the product and are only 6 months removed from consumption. Others work in advertising, preparing the ad campaign for the next year, and others are in sales. As you can see, the different stages correspond to different time periods. The other day, when I was interviewed for the Telemadrid News, I had 2 minutes to explain to viewers the theory of capital. Did I say 2 minutes? I had 25 seconds. And I had to explain the effect of prior credit expansion and how it has led to investment errors on a massive scale. I made a comparison anyone should be able to understand. In light of the popularity of green shoots, I explained that the productive structure is like a tree. In this case, a horizontal tree with many branches, many of which have rotted. In other words, many of these branches have been unduly extended as a result of artificial credit expansion caused by fractional reserve banking, through the process we studied in the last chapter. And now the market is revealing those investment errors, and the only way to put things right is to cut off the rotten branches. It is like pruning a shrub that has rotten branches. The shrub then recovers, regains strength and vitality, and can grow again. This is the phase we are in, the phase of economic recession. I would like to talk about something of great importance to all who are filled with the desire to help the poor and the needy. This desire is proper, but we must not be deceived, nor allow ourselves to be manipulated. We have to study things scientifically. As I have already pointed out, the difference between the poor Robinson Crusoe and the rich Robinson Crusoe lies precisely in that the rich Crusoe has capital goods in the form of savings invested wisely and not invested in a maladjusted fashion. He has at his disposal a well-invested capital good. the stick, which enables him to obtain many other goods, and thus to move forward and increase his quality of life more and more. In contrast, the poor Crusoe does not have a capital good. We can draw the same distinction between a rich nation and a poor nation. What difference is there between the United States and India? Is it that in India people work less and are therefore poorer? No. People in India work as much as people in the United States, if not more. Is it that the people of India have less technological know-how than the Americans or the Swiss? No, they have the same. In fact, Indian technicians are the best in the world. The difference between a wealthy nation and a poor nation lies exclusively in one thing. The wealthy nation has many more capital goods wisely invested than the poor nation. In India, farmers are still using 2 cows and a Roman plough, while in the United States, a man with a tractor and a computer achieves 1,000 times as much as an Indian worker. He is 1,000 times as productive because he has a tractor, and the other worker does not. The rich Robinson Crusoe has a stick, and the poor Robinson Crusoe works by hand. If you work by hand, and you are very close to consumption, you are very poor. If you have many intermediate stages, computers, machines, tractors, etc., you can increase production 1,000-fold, and much more than 1,000-fold, and be much richer. That is the difference between a wealthy country and a poor country. So, to be prosperous, who should we encourage? The answer is clear. Capitalists. The only way to escape from poverty is to foster saving, protect capitalists, and establish a system in which private property is respected and entrepreneurial creativity is encouraged, along with the suitable investment of saving in capital goods. A country that harasses savers and capitalists is a country condemned to poverty. A country that fosters saving, respect for private property, and the accumulation of capital goods is a country that finds its way out of poverty, and in just a few generations can be at the forefront of economic development. Notice that we live in a world completely inundated with demagogy. What do we hear? All right, let's take a democratic vote. Okay, now who votes in favor of doubling salaries and cutting work in half? If we took that democratic vote, what do you think the result would be? In favor. Well, since we must be democratic, suppose we did that. If we put it into practice, do you think the country would be richer or poorer? Infinitely poorer. A process of social cooperation cannot depend on democratic principles. If it did, the process would be destroyed. Notice that demagogy is always detrimental to the very people demagogues claim to defend. A month from now, I will explain that in the market there is a law of tendency, according to which each worker tends to be paid the value of his or her contribution to the process of production. Of course, a worker who works with bare hands or with a Roman plough contributes very little, and therefore earns very little. Such is the case of the Indian labourer. Someone who works with computers or a tractor produces a great deal. That worker is very productive, and therefore earns a large amount. The only way to help the working classes and the poorest is to provide them with capital goods saved by capitalists. To do this, it is essential to first foster saving, protect capitalists, and establish an institutional framework that encourages the proper long-term investment of savings in increasingly productive capital goods. This is economic science. From now on, you will have to interpret the world around you in a manner diametrically opposite to the way it is usually presented. For if everything were simply a question of voluntarism or do-goodism, we must take from the rich and give to the poor. Let us consider this example. All right, what we need to do here is take from the rich and give to the poor so that we can all be richer. This is the triumph of the philosophy of the grasshopper over the philosophy of the ant. Capitalists own all of these capital goods. Suppose we expropriate them and give them all to the workers. The workers immediately consume them because they want a higher living standard. And what happens then? They consume the capital. These stages disappear, and people end up condemned to poverty. The redistribution of income leads to poverty. Wealth derives from saving and the accumulation of capital goods. Multimillionaires cannot eat 1,000 steaks a day or have 1,000 Rolls-Royces. They can eat the best meat and have a luxury car and the best homes, but the rest of what they own consists of capital goods which have been saved, and therefore placed at the disposal of workers, whose productivity increases, and whose wages increase in turn. Think of the well-known story about March, the famous Spanish Mallorcan millionaire, who with his fortune established the Juan March Foundation. During the Spanish Civil War, a protest was staged at his house. "You are a millionaire, and we demand that you divide up your fortune and share it with us." "Well, how much do you think I have?" "You have 300 million pesetas." 300 million pesetas? How many of you are there here at the protest? 1,000. Okay, great. If we divide 300 million pesetas among 30 million Spaniards, each one gets 10 pesetas. Give each of the 1,000 protesters 10 pesetas and ask them to leave. However, if all Spanish people had been there, and he had given each one 10 pesetas, this man's fortune would have disappeared. But at the same time, they would have destroyed the country. Instead of postponing consumption in the form of capital goods, they would have consumed the capital. They would have consumed the wooden stick, and their future living standard would have dropped as a result. Another essential idea is that capital goods are difficult to convert. And in fact, the closer we get to the final stage, consumption, the more difficult they are to convert. In other words, a brick that comes out of this factory back here in the process could end up as part of an apartment, a children's school, a university, etc. A sheet of metal produced in a blast furnace here might ultimately be used in a vehicle, a car, a train, a ship, or the metallic structure of a building. If there is a change of plans, because tastes or circumstances change, then you can, though you thought a certain sheet of metal would most likely end up being used to build a car, if circumstances change, the demand for cars drops, for instance, you can, if you are near the beginning of the process, rearrange capital goods and convert them for use in another line of production. However, if you have already built a home on the coast, and it turns out to have been an entrepreneurial error, and you are stuck with it. To put this another way, you are in first year. There may be someone here who does not really like this subject, and that person may be thinking, well, the truth is, I will lose a year, but my vocation is for medicine. I have applied and been accepted. I am going to start all over. I am going to leave the business program and study medicine. I still have time. Oh, but what if you were in 5th year and almost finished? If I am dating someone, I still have time to change course. But what if I have already been married to her for 20 years, and we have 5 children? The closer capital goods are to the final stage, the more difficult they are to convert. This is important to the theory of the cycle, as we will see. When we study the theory of the cycle and closely examine the investment errors credit expansion provokes, this will all be very clear.